The workshop in Kyoto, where the Sato family had perfected the art of Urushi, traditional Japanese lacquerware, for 4 centuries, smelled of fine wood, careful solvent, and profound history. For Aiko Sato, the subtle, patient layering of resin was not merely a profession, it was a devotion, a philosophy passed down through generations. She was the firm's true genius, blending traditional craftsmanship with modern engineering, ensuring the integrity of every piece that bore the Sato crest. Her primary rival was her cousin, Kenji, the head of finance and sales in the Tokyo branch. Kenji possessed charm and ruthless corporate ambition, but none of the artistic soul or ethical restraint that defined the Sato name. The central conflict was rooted in their opposing visions. Aiko demanded integrity, using only the finest natural lacquer and meticulous, time-consuming curing processes. Kenji, desperate to cut costs and fund his own extravagant lifestyle, continuously lobbied for cheaper, synthetic resins and accelerated automated curing cycles. Aiko, foreseeing this ethical compromise, had years ago subtly engineered a safeguard into the firm's newly installed, proprietary automated curing systems. It was a hidden flaw in the thermal consistency monitoring, a silent, digital failsafe that would only activate if the resin composition deviated dangerously from the natural organic formula Aiko had deemed essential. It was her signature on the code, an uncompromising defense of the family's honor. Kenji's recklessness eventually caught up with him. He had been quietly hemorrhaging company funds through disastrous personal investments and fraudulent reporting. As the annual external audit loomed, Kenji saw only one solution: to eliminate the most trusted figure who might expose his financial ruin. He chose Aiko. Leveraging the deep-seated traditional resistance to women in leadership within the older board members, Kenji fabricated an elaborate dossier, falsely accusing Aiko of sharing proprietary, classified curing techniques with a rival Chinese firm for personal profit. He twisted her professional dedication to modernization into evidence of corporate espionage. The shaming was swift, brutal, and public, a catastrophe far exceeding the loss of a job in the rigid environment of Japanese corporate culture. Aiko was forced to face the entire board, her reputation shredded by the insinuation of disloyalty and greed. In Kyoto, where honor is the currency, the accusation was a form of professional death. Thorne, her father, a quiet man who had trusted Kenji implicitly, sat in stoic, agonizing silence. The public disgrace was formalized with an immediate, permanent banishment from the Sato firm and the forfeiture of her family shares. Aiko walked out of the corporate headquarters not with a severance package, but with the full weight of dishonor, a shame more profound than any prison sentence. Kenji immediately seized Aiko's role, consolidating artistic authority under his sales division. His first directive was to implement the cost-cutting measures he had always championed. Ignoring Aiko's stringent material sourcing codes, Kenji secretly switched the core resin for their prestigious new annual line, the Revival Collection, to a fast-curing mass-produced synthetic formula. The savings were enormous, but the ethical violation was total. He did this in absolute confidence, believing that Aiko, the only one who understood the physics and coding of the curing process, was permanently silenced and destroyed. Evelyn retreated to a small, isolated studio in the northern hills outside of Kyoto, a place of forced exile and profound introspection. She allowed the shame to wash over her, not to break her, but to burn away all personal emotion until only cold, strategic clarity remained. Her revenge could not be fought in the courts. The scandal had tainted her name beyond repair. Her only path was intellectual, proving the scientific and artistic fraud Kenji had committed, thereby destroying his authority and restoring the sanctity of the Sato name. She knew Kenji's weakness. His arrogance lay in his belief that the traditional art of Urushi could be reduced to a profitable industrial process. He had replaced the soul of the craft with cheap chemical substitutes. Aiko's safeguard, the small hidden flaw in the automated system, now became her key. She began preparing the remote trigger that would expose the structural weakness of the inferior resin on a very specific public stage. The failure had to be spectacular, immediate, and utterly undeniable. The launch of Kenji's The Revival collection was only 3 months away. Aiko's exile was a period of intense, solitary preparation. She spent weeks meticulously analyzing the chemical composition of the new synthetic resin Kenji had adopted, cross-referencing its thermal behavior against the parameters she had embedded in the automated curing system years ago. Her suspicions were confirmed. The synthetic material had an extremely low tolerance for minor temperature fluctuations during the critical post-curing phase. Kenji, speeding up the process for mass production, had set the thermal control parameters far too tightly, assuming the automated system was infallible. Aiko knew her hidden flaw, the subtle variance in the thermal consistency monitoring software, would introduce the exact, calculated fluctuation necessary to shatter the cheap material's crystalline structure, a destruction that would manifest as irreversible, visible cracks across the lacquer surface. She worked remotely, using untraceable servers and secure network entry points to bypass the company's firewalls. She wasn't hacking for theft. She was accessing her own legacy. She initiated the override of the thermal sensor calibration protocols, setting a timed microfluctuation to activate exactly 15 minutes into the product showcase. The execution had to be flawless, delivered precisely at the height of Kenji's public triumph. The launch of The Revival collection was held in a gleaming, minimalist exhibition hall in Ginza, Tokyo. The event was packed with elite clients, influential press, and, most critically, potential international investors whose massive capital infusion was essential for Kenji's long-term financial stability. Kenji, polished and radiating fraudulent confidence, stood beside the dazzling display. Hundreds of meticulously arranged plates, bowls, and vases of the new lacquer line, bathed in spotlights. Aiko was there, unrecognizable, blending into the crowd near the back of the hall. She observed Kenji's arrogant performance as he spoke passionately about Sato's future, conveniently omitting any mention of her work or her family's ethical past. He spoke of the efficiency of the new production line, subtly mocking the old, time-consuming methods Aiko had championed. As Kenji moved toward the centerpiece, a massive, symbolic Urushi vase, for the grand unveiling, Aiko silently initiated the command sequence. The hidden flaw she had installed years ago, designed as a defense mechanism for the integrity of the family's art, began its work. The automated curing system, now millions of miles away, began introducing microfluctuations into the exhibition hall's climate control. 15 minutes later, as Kenji raised his hand dramatically to unveil the massive vase, a sound started. A faint, high-pitched tinkling like fine glass shattering in a strong wind. The sound originated from the display pedestals. Kenji ignored it, his focus on the cameras. But the sound grew louder, more insistent, a cacophony of cracks propagating through the rigid synthetic resin. The guests turned from Kenji to the displays. Under the intense, unforgiving spotlights, thin, jagged golden-brown lines began to spiderweb across the surface of the new collection. The synthetic lacquer, unable to withstand the controlled microstress, was literally shattering. Within seconds, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of product was visibly ruined, covered in a network of fissures. Kenji's triumphant smile dissolved into pure, frozen terror. He stared at the ruined collection. The international investors immediately began packing their portfolios, their faces etched with professional disgust. The product itself, the foundation of his promised fortune, had failed publicly and spectacularly. Aiko stepped forward, moving quietly toward the stage. Kenji saw her, recognizing her not as the defeated outcast, but as the ghost of his crime. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking with absolute despair. "The integrity test failed, Kenji," Aiko said, her voice clear and carrying through the stunned silence. "You replaced the soul of the craft with cheap material. My code only proved the scientific truth." She was speaking of Kintsugi, the art of mending broken pottery with gold, celebrating its flaws. "Your line is broken," Aiko stated, "but the honesty of the Sato name is not. You broke the lacquer. I simply exposed the crack." The investigation that followed was swift and devastating. The financial auditors, already alerted by the sudden catastrophic failure, uncovered Kenji's systemic embezzlement and fraud, confirming Aiko's initial accusations. Kenji lost everything: the firm, his reputation, and his freedom. Aiko, her honor irrevocably restored, was eventually invited back by the remaining board members, not for a title, but as the only person capable of restoring the integrity of the family name. She refused the executive role but returned to her workshop, mentoring a new generation, ensuring that no one would ever confuse the soul of a true craftswoman with the greed of a fraudster. The unbreakable Kintsugi was not the physical art. It was the superior, resilient strength of Aiko's character.